When radar operators watched their screens shimmer to life on the morning of June 19, 1944, they knew exactly what they were seeing. Task Force 58's Fighter Direction Center hummed with activity as phosphorescent blips plotted across the scopes in the Philippine waters. The USS Albacore, lurking beneath the surface, had just transmitted an urgent warning. Enemy carrier formations were assembling, multiple air groups preparing to launch. An attack was coming. Lieutenant Charles Sims pressed his headphones against his ears and leaned toward the radio transmitter. A cascade of orders flowed through the communication network. Within minutes, 15 aircraft carriers would be scrambling their fighter complements into the sky. The USS Lexington, the USS Enterprise, and the USS Yorktown each would contribute its full fighter complement to meet the incoming threat. But none of these men, staring at their screens and checking their ammunition, realized they were about to witness something unprecedented in naval warfare. What would unfold over the next few hours would become the deadliest aerial mismatch the Pacific War had ever seen. The men at Task Force 58 had learned through brutal experience that Japanese carrier pilots weren't simply capable opponents. These were warriors trained with an intensity matched only by ancient samurai traditions. Destroy those pilots, it was understood, and you could reduce entire carrier task groups to helpless, defenseless ships. Admiral Gizaburo Ozawa had assembled a striking force of unprecedented proportions. 9 aircraft carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Junyo, Hio, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. In their hangars and on their flight decks rested 430 aircraft, each one carrying ordnance and armed crews prepared to deliver a devastating blow against the American invasion forces on Saipan. The Japanese Navy's planners had calculated with meticulous care. Land-based aircraft stationed on Guam, Rota, and Tinian would operate in concert with the carrier's strike force. When combined, over 500 combat aircraft would descend upon American positions. The mathematics seemed overwhelming. Admiral Somu Toyoda, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet himself, had declared that the Empire's fate rested entirely on this single engagement. Those expectations, however, collided with American industrial capability and pilot development. The Grumman F6F Hellcat cut through the tropical air at 380 miles per hour, its Pratt & Whitney engine generating 2,000 horsepower and driving 12,598 pounds of armored fighter through the contested skies above the Philippine Sea. Commander David McCampbell gathered his pilots in the ready room aboard the USS Lexington to review what awaited them. His air group carried 104 pilots, men trained exclusively to kill Japanese aircraft through systematic instruction and repetitive practice. Each Hellcat mounted 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns positioned throughout its fuselage. 400 rounds per gun meant sufficient ammunition for extended engagements. The cockpit sat surrounded by 220 pounds of protective armor, a design choice that would prove critical when tracers and cannon rounds began cutting through the air. The Hellcat represented something fundamental about American manufacturing and philosophy. Unlike the fragile Zero that had sacrificed almost everything in the pursuit of maneuverability and range, the F6F prioritized pilot survival and destructive capability. Those 6 machine guns could fire armor-piercing rounds at 850 rounds per minute. The mathematics of ballistics favored the American fighter decisively. A skilled pilot in a Zero could outmaneuver a Hellcat in a turning fight. That was never disputed. But a Hellcat pilot needed only 2 seconds of accurate fire to reduce any Japanese aircraft into falling wreckage. Lieutenant Alexander Vraciu had spent 8 months studying those statistics, converting them into tactical understanding. A DePaul University graduate with an intuitive grasp of deflection shooting, Vraciu had learned that aerial combat ultimately reduced itself to a simple equation: altitude plus speed equals survival. The principles were straightforward, but demanded absolute precision in execution. Target acquisition, calculation of deflection angles, understanding how split-second positioning differences separated the living from the dead. The difference lay in superior firepower deployed with skill. The American force assembled in these waters represented a staggering concentration of naval power. 15 fleet carriers, 956 combat aircraft of all types, 475 Hellcat fighters alone. Task Force 58, operating under Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell's command, had become the most destructive naval striking force ever put to sea. Against this armada of American power, Ozawa could field 430 carrier aircraft, supplemented by perhaps 100 land-based fighters already positioned on island bases. The numerical disadvantage was brutal, nearly 2-1 before the first shot was fired. Aboard the Japanese carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Ozawa reviewed the attack plans one final time. 430 aircraft arranged into sequential waves, each time to arrive at Task Force 58 in mounting pressure. The Taiho and her sister carriers represented 65,000 tons of carrier steel, powered by the finest engines Japanese shipyards could produce. Her pilots had trained for months, preparing for this decisive moment. Yet the mathematics of Japanese naval aviation had begun collapsing from within. The core weakness stemmed from something the Japanese Navy never successfully overcame, a problem that had plagued them since Midway: the steady erosion of pilot experience through combat attrition. Veterans who had fought at Pearl Harbor, conducted raids through the Indian Ocean, and survived the early carrier battles had been methodically killed and never replaced with comparable talent. The replacement pilots showing up in the carrier's ready rooms averaged fewer than 200 flying hours, sometimes significantly less. American pilots arriving at carrier squadrons had accumulated over 500 hours of intensive training. But the disparity went much deeper than simple flight hours. American pilots received extensive training in gunnery techniques, practiced carrier landings repeatedly until they became instinctive, and studied instrument flying under controlled conditions. Japanese replacement pilots often arrived at their units never having fired their weapons in anger. Many had executed fewer than 10 successful carrier landings. Navigation training was sparse at best, with pilots learning to depend on flight leaders who would guide formation flying and locate distant targets. The American formations had built their defenses in layers of interlocking firepower. Destroyers created the perimeter. Battleships formed a secondary ring. The precious carriers occupied the center, surrounded by multiple layers of protection. Every ship swept its radar beam across the sky, searching for approaching aircraft. Fighter direction officers sat in air-conditioned compartments below decks, their plotting boards updating constantly with every radar contact within 150 miles. Radar operator First Class James Peterson had been tracking contacts continuously for 14 months, working Pacific operations across thousands of miles. His hands moved automatically across the radar controls, adjusting gain, sweeping the antenna, maintaining the search pattern. The screen showed clear returns with minimal clutter from the sea's surface. The conditions favored detection completely. Clear skies stretched overhead. Visibility extended for dozens of miles. No precipitation created false echoes that would confuse the operators. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Peterson's radar scope suddenly erupted with multiple contacts filling the entire display. He read off the critical information instantly. 150 miles distant, bearing 260 degrees, altitude approximately 20,000 feet. Peterson hit the general quarters alarm, his other hand moving to the intercom control. His voice carried across the communication network with practiced calm. Bridge, radar contact. Large formation bearing 260, range 150 miles, altitude 20,000. Aboard the Taiho, the strike coordinator had launched the first assault wave at 0830. 69 aircraft had lifted from the carrier's flight deck, 16 Zeros providing fighter cover, 45 dive bombers carrying ordnance, 8 torpedo bombers loaded with their weapons. Formation assembly required 23 minutes from the first aircraft launching until all bombers had joined up in the proper attack configuration. The journey to American positions would consume approximately 90 minutes of flight time, with pilots maintaining a fuel-conscious cruising speed of 180 knots. Fighter Director Lieutenant Joseph Eager worked his plotting board, calculating the intercept geometry with pencil and ruler. The Japanese formation was estimated at 180 knots ground speed, roughly maintaining a course of 080 toward Task Force 58. If Hellcats launched immediately, He calculated approximately 35 minutes before the formations would meet. The precision required in these calculations was absolute. Fuel consumed, climb rate, intercept timing all required exact coordination. Admiral Mark Mitchell's command decision came without hesitation. Launch all fighter squadrons. Vector them 260. Climb to altitude, 25,000 feet. The first Hellcats launched at 10:23. Within 12 minutes, 140 F6F fighters had lifted from the flight decks and were climbing into the bright morning sky. Every pilot had received briefing on Japanese tactics, aircraft recognition, the critical importance of maintaining altitude advantage. The Hellcats climbed at 3,000 feet per minute, their powerful engines creating an edge in the crucial race toward altitude. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer led the 1st Division from the USS Lexington. 16 Hellcats organized into 4 plane divisions, climbing steadily through 20,000 feet when the radar operators called out the contact. The Japanese formation was at 24,000 feet, closing rapidly, 30 miles out and decreasing. Brewer's voice crackled across the radio. Tally-ho, bandits, 10 o'clock high. The sky filled with twisting contrails as Hellcats drove down toward the Japanese formation in diving attacks. Brewer's first burst hit a zero crossing through his gun sight. The fighter dissolved into flames and began its spiraling descent toward the ocean below. His wingman fired a deflection shot that caught a dive bomber's right wing cleanly, the wing separating from the fuselage and both pieces tumbling downward. In just 90 seconds, 8 Japanese aircraft had been knocked from formation, beginning their fatal descents. The Hellcats' 650 caliber guns created lethal convergence at 300 yards, the point where all 6 bullet streams intersected. At that distance, 2 seconds of sustained firing delivered 170 rounds into a target area roughly 6 feet in diameter. Japanese aircraft, designed without self-sealing fuel tanks or pilot armor protection, literally disintegrated under such concentrated firepower, their aluminum structures tearing apart, fuel igniting, control surfaces separating. Lieutenant Stanley Sweet Valdez, flying from the USS Yorktown, watched the formation fall apart before his guns. He recalled the shock. They came in perfect formation, like they were on parade. We hit them from above and behind. It was like shooting clay pigeons. They didn't even try to evade. By 11 o'clock, the first wave had ceased to exist as an organized fighting force. 42 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed outright. 27 more sustained damage, requiring them to break formation and attempt return to their carriers. Only 12 Japanese bombers had managed to penetrate close enough to attack positions, and of those, 7 fell to the concentrated anti-aircraft fire from the battleship screen. The newest secret weapon, proximity-fused shells that detonated near aircraft without requiring direct hits, created expanding clouds of shrapnel that tore through airframes. At 11:07, radar operators detected the second assault wave developing on their screens. This formation was larger, composed of 128 aircraft that had been launched from Junyo, Hio, and Ryuho at 9 o'clock in the morning. The composition included 53 Judy dive bombers, 27 Zero fighters, and 48 torpedo bombers arranged in tactical formation. Lieutenant Commander Kazuo Takahashi led this strike himself, a pilot who had survived 18 combat missions, including desperate attacks at Coral Sea and the Eastern Solomons. Fighter direction vectored fresh combat air patrol fighters to intercept the formation when it was still 60 miles distant from the task force. The Hellcats held altitude advantage, cruising at 28,000 feet, while the Japanese climbed to only 19,000. In aerial combat, energy advantage translated directly to tactical superiority, providing pilots the ability to dictate engagement ranges, attack angles, and disengagement options. Lieutenant Alexander Vrachiu's division was scrambled to intercept this second wave, yet fate proved unlucky. Vrachiu's Hellcat suffered a mechanical failure during the launch sequence. His supercharger stuck in low-blower position, restricting his maximum speed to 300 miles per hour and cutting his normal climb rate in half. By the time Vrachiu reached altitude, his squadron mates had already moved ahead to engage the approaching enemy. Yet Vrachiu spotted the Japanese formation assembling below him. At least 50 aircraft, Judy dive bombers maintaining perfect formation in the classical Japanese style. The target presentation seemed almost unbelievably simple. Despite his mechanical disadvantage, Vraciu executed a diving attack from directly above the Japanese formation's center. His first burst connected perfectly with the lead Judy's fuel tanks. The dive bomber erupted in a massive fireball. Vraciu pulled up, rolled his Hellcat inverted, and dove again into the formation. His second target's tail separated cleanly from the fuselage, severed by the sustained burst of 50 caliber rounds. The third kill came as Vraciu pulled out of his dive and climbed back towards safety. A Judy crossed directly in front of his gun sight. He fired a short burst that ignited the bomber's fuel tanks, flame spreading across the wings. The fourth victim never detected Vraciu's approach. He attacked from the bomber's blind spot below and behind, his tracers walking up the fuselage until the aircraft exploded in mid-air. Vraciu's fifth kill required pursuing a Judy attempting to escape at low altitude. Despite his reduced speed, Vraciu closed the distance to point-blank range and opened fire. The bomber cartwheeled into the ocean surface below. The sixth and final kill proved unforgettable for its spectacular nature. As Vraciu lined up his attack position, the Judy's bomb load detonated from the burning fuel. The resulting fireball consumed the aircraft, yet Vraciu flew straight through the explosion, emerging on the other side as shrapnel and burning debris continued falling. 8 minutes of combat, 6 aircraft destroyed. Only 360 rounds expended. His ordnance crew later performed the mathematics. Vraciu had fired less than 5 seconds of total gunfire to achieve all 6 kills. When Vraciu landed back aboard the Lexington, he held up 6 fingers toward the bridge where Admiral Mitchell observed the landing. The photograph captured that moment, fingers raised, triumph obvious despite exhaustion. The image became one of the war's iconic moments. The second wave was systematically destroyed. Hellcat pilots claimed 70 kills. The ship's anti-aircraft guns destroyed another 20 aircraft. Only 31 Japanese aircraft survived to return to their carriers, most heavily damaged and piloted by men in severe shock. The technological disparity between American and Japanese aviation had become overwhelming by June 1944. The Hellcat represented 3 years of accumulated combat experience, lessons learned from every engagement since Pearl Harbor, translated into mechanical excellence. The Pratt & Whitney R2800W engine produced 2,000 horsepower in standard configuration, with water injection boosting output to 2,200 horsepower. This power drove a 3-bladed Hamilton propeller with constant speed capability, maintaining optimal performance at any altitude. Maximum speed reached 380 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. The rate of climb exceeded 3,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling stretched to 37,300 feet. Defensive systems included 220 pounds of protective armor plating positioned around the pilot, oil cooler, and oil tank. The windscreen consisted of 1 1/2 inches of bulletproof glass, capable of withstanding 20mm cannon fire. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented the catastrophic fires that destroyed Japanese aircraft regularly. Total fuel capacity of 250 gallons internally. Expandable to 400 gallons with drop tanks, extended combat range to 1,530 miles. The fire control system represented American mass production at its finest. 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each firing 850 rounds per minute, with 400 rounds per gun. Total ammunition load reached 2,400 rounds. The guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a concentrated impact zone where a brief burst destroyed virtually any aircraft. The comparison with Japanese fighters revealed brutal disparity. The Mitsubishi A6M50 weighed 6,025 pounds loaded, exactly half the Hellcat's weight. Maximum speed reached only 351 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour slower than the F6F. Most critically, the Zero carried no pilot armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Its 20mm cannon carried only 60 rounds per gun, while the light machine guns proved ineffective against American armor protection. The Yokosuka D4Y Judy dive bomber represented one of Japan's newest designs, achieving 339 miles per hour, yet remaining hopelessly vulnerable to any accurate hit. Without armor or self-sealing tanks, a single incendiary round ignited its fuel catastrophically. The Nakajima B-6N JIL torpedo bomber suffered identical vulnerabilities, slower, less maneuverable, and utterly defenseless against American firepower. Japanese pilot training had collapsed under attrition's relentless pressure. Pre-war pilots had received 700 hours of flight training before joining operational squadrons. By 1944, replacement pilots averaged 200 hours, with some deploying with as few as 100 hours before entering combat. Navigation training had become minimal. Instrument flying was virtually non-existent. Formation flying techniques remained rudimentary at best. American pilot training had transformed into an industrial process. Naval aviators received minimum 600 hours before receiving carrier qualification. Instrument flying, navigation, advanced gunnery, carrier operations, formation tactics, every element was refined through systematic instruction. Training bases at Florida, Texas, and California produced 10,000 naval aviators annually by 1944. The American pipeline never stopped delivering new pilots who exceeded replacement losses. Ozawa launched his third strike at 10 o'clock in the morning. 47 aircraft drawn from Zuikaku, Chiyoda, and Chitose. By this time, Japanese flight leaders understood from survivor reports that earlier waves had encountered withering opposition, yet orders remained orders. Lieutenant Yoshio Fukumura led 15 Zero fighters providing escort, having watched survivors from previous strikes return with tales of swarming Hellcats and walls of concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Radar detected the third wave at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, still 120 miles distant. Fighter direction had refined its interception tactics based on the morning's engagements. Rather than attempting to meet the raid head-on, which allowed Japanese aircraft mutual support, combat air patrol fighters would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing coordination. Commander William Dean led 20 Hellcats from USS Hornet in a high-side attack, positioning themselves between the Sun and the Japanese formation. The Japanese fighters flying protective weave above their bombers never saw the Americans until tracers began cutting through their formations. Dean's first pass destroyed 3 Japanese fighters in 15 seconds. His wingman killed 2 more in the same diving attack. The Hellcat pilots fell upon the bombers with methodical efficiency, working through the formation systematically. Lieutenant James Shirley, flying from USS Bunker Hill, observed the slaughter below him, describing it simply to the debriefers afterward. They sat motionless in their formations while American guns tore through their ranks. No sudden maneuvers, no defensive moves, no evasive tactics of any kind. They maintained their course and altitude as American fighters made pass after pass, each one deadlier than the last. Ensign Wilbur Webb flew his first combat mission from USS Hornet, and that's when he stumbled into the shattered remnants of the third Japanese wave. In his official report afterward, Webb described the shocking simplicity of what he witnessed. "I couldn't believe they just flew straight and level," he wrote. "I shot them down one after another. After the third explosion lit up the sky, I started to feel something like pity for them." Then Pearl Harbor came flooding back into his mind, and his fingers stayed on the trigger. By the time the engagement ended, Webb had destroyed 6 aircraft in a single action. He became an ace on his very first combat mission. 40 Japanese planes had comprised that entire third wave. 7 managed to limp back to their carriers. Not a single Japanese aircraft pressed home an attack against the American fleet. The fourth and final wave launched at 11:30, consisting of 82 aircraft from the Japanese carrier divisions. 30 fighters, 36 dive bombers, and 16 torpedo bombers made up this desperate wave. Many of these pilots were experienced aviators the Japanese had carefully held back for one decisive strike. But something went terribly wrong almost from the start. Navigation problems scattered half the formation. Instead of heading toward Task Force 58, roughly half the planes found themselves flying toward Guam instead. Those aircraft that did locate the American fleet faced a nightmare waiting for them. The defenders had built a wall of fighters stacked between 10,000 and 30,000 feet, layer upon layer of ready interceptors. The Americans had refined their defense to a science by this point. Fresh Hellcats constantly cycled through the combat zone, replacing those running low on ammunition or fuel. Lieutenant Commander Roger Mealy from Fighting Squadron 2 intercepted the fourth wave when they were still 40 miles from the carriers. Just 4 Hellcats under his command faced off against 30 Japanese aircraft. Over the next 12 minutes, Mealy's division destroyed 17 enemy planes without losing a single fighter. Mealy himself accounted for 5 of those kills, methodically working through the formation from rear to front like he was cutting through butter. More waves of Hellcats kept rolling in, replacing those that were running dry. Fresh aircraft with full ammunition magazines rotated through the battle. Damaged Hellcats returned to the carriers where mechanics and ordnance crews worked feverishly, rearming and refueling for another launch. The American carriers had become machines of destruction, churning out armed fighters faster than the Japanese could send them. Launch, recover, rearm, refuel, launch again. The cycle never stopped. Commander David McCampbell led Essex's fighter defense and showed tactical brilliance throughout the engagement. In his morning sortie, he shot down 5 Judy dive bombers with precision and calm. After his aircraft was serviced, he launched again in the afternoon and destroyed 2 more Zeros that were trying to reach Guam. 7 victories in a single day. His ability to position the squadrons for maximum impact while carefully managing fuel and ammunition reserves played a crucial role in the day's success. By 2:30 in the afternoon, the fourth wave had essentially ceased to exist as an organized force. Survivors scattered in different directions, some limping back toward their carriers, others diverting to Guam to try landing there. American Combat Air Patrol hunted them across a 100-mile stretch of ocean, picking off stragglers and isolated aircraft. While Hellcats dominated the skies, American submarines were waging their own devastating war below the surface. USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, had been shadowing Ozawa's fleet since dawn. At 9:05 in the morning, Blanchard fired 6 torpedoes at Taiho, Ozawa's flagship carrier. 1 struck home, rupturing the aviation fuel tanks. Initially, the damage looked manageable, but flammable vapors began spreading like poison through the ship's compartments. At 2:32 in the afternoon, a catastrophic explosion tore Taiho apart. This was the newest and largest carrier in the entire Japanese fleet, commissioned just 3 months earlier. Over 1,600 crew members went down with her. USS Kavala was on her maiden war patrol under Lieutenant Commander Herman Kosler when she detected Shokaku at 1100 hours. Kosler aimed his tubes and fired 6 torpedoes. 3 hit their mark. Aviation fuel erupted across the hangar deck as bomb magazines detonated in sequence, each explosion triggering others. Shokaku had survived Pearl Harbor, the Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz. Now she sank, taking 1472 men with her. In just 4 hours, submarines had eliminated 2 fleet carriers and 60,000 tons of Japanese naval power. Combined with the aerial devastation, the Japanese Navy had suffered damage that could never be repaired. As sunset fell on June 19th, the numbers told a brutal story. The Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus approximately 50 land-based planes from Guam and Rota. 2 fleet carriers had been sunk, but the pilot losses were truly catastrophic. Over 400 pilots and aircrew lay dead, including nearly all the remaining experienced aviators the Japanese had spent years training. American losses totaled 29 aircraft from aerial combat and operational accidents. Most pilots were recovered. American casualties overall reached 109 killed from all causes, including anti-aircraft fire and operational losses. The kill ratio exceeded 15-1 in America's favor. Individual pilots compiled extraordinary scores. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu achieved 6 kills. Commander David McCampbell claimed 7. Lieutenant William Dean recorded 5 kills. Ensign Wilbur Webb shot down 6 on his very first combat mission. Behind these statistics lay profoundly human stories. Young American pilots, most still in their early 20s, had methodically destroyed an entire generation of Japan's naval aviators. Lieutenant Junior Grade Charles Stimpson from USS Cabot reflected later with brutal honesty. "It wasn't really combat," he said. "It was execution. They came in waves and we shot them down in waves. I felt like I was standing at a rifle range. Japanese pilot officer Yoshijiro Shirahama, one of the survivors observing from Iwo Jima, captured the catastrophe in different words. June 19, 1944, was the day Japanese naval aviation died, he wrote in his testimony. Our rebuilt air groups, trained for 2 solid years, were destroyed in a single day. The Americans transformed the sky into a butcher shop. Those who came home spoke of Hellcats everywhere. Above, beside, behind. There was nowhere to go. June 20th brought the final chapter. American search aircraft located Ozawa's retreating fleet 275 miles west of Task Force 58. Admiral Mitchell had to make a critical choice: launch a strike knowing his pilots would return after dark, or let the Japanese slip away. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Mitchell made his decision. Launch everything. 216 aircraft climbed into the fading light. 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, 54 torpedo bombers. They reached the Japanese fleet at sunset and attacked through sheets of anti-aircraft fire. The strike sank carrier Heiau and 2 fleet oilers. Carriers Zuikaku and Chiyoda suffered damage. Battleship Haruna and cruiser Maya took hits. The Japanese had fewer than 35 operational fighters left to defend themselves. They managed to destroy another 65 American aircraft in this twilight engagement, but the battle was clearly lost. The return flight became an ordeal of navigation and survival that tested every pilot. Planes flew through complete darkness, with fuel gauges nearly at zero. Many had never attempted landing on a carrier at night. Radio discipline collapsed as desperate pilots called for directions to any friendly ship they could find. Admiral Mitchell then made perhaps the most famous decision of his career. Turn on the lights. Every ship in Task Force 58 lit up the night. Searchlights pointed straight up. Running lights blazed. Flight decks glowed with light. Mitchell accepted the submarine risk to save his air crews. Destroyers fired star shells to mark the fleet's location. Cruisers turned on searchlights as beacons guiding pilots home. The ocean became like a city beacon, shining through the darkness. Aircraft landed on whatever deck they could reach. Fuel-starved planes ditched alongside destroyers. Damaged aircraft crash-landed on carriers, crews pushing wreckage overboard to make room for others still approaching. 80 planes were lost to fuel exhaustion or crash landings, but aggressive rescue efforts saved most crews. Destroyers stationed as plane guards recovered pilots sometimes within minutes of ditching. Only 49 airmen from the returning strike were lost, a stunning achievement under impossible circumstances. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by victorious American pilots, marked the end of Japanese carrier aviation as any kind of fighting force. In 2 days, Japan had lost approximately 480 carrier and land-based aircraft, 3 fleet carriers and 2 oilers. The pilot losses were staggering. Over 445 aircrew killed, including virtually all the remaining veteran pilots. Admiral Ozawa's Operation Igo had assumed parity in pilot training and aircraft performance. Instead, Japanese pilots encountered American aviators with superior training flying superior aircraft, supported by superior radar and fighter direction systems. The technological and training gap had become impossible to close. The Marianas fell to American forces within weeks. B-29 super fortresses, based on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, would soon carry the war directly to Japan's cities and factories. Raids beginning in November 1944 from these bases marked the start of systematic destruction of Japanese industrial centers and population. Japanese naval aviation attempted one more operation at Leyte Gulf 4 months later, but could muster only 108 aircraft from 6 carriers. Most were shot down with minimal results. The carriers themselves were sacrificed as empty decoys, hollow shadows of their former glory. After Leyte Gulf, Japanese carriers never again launched offensive operations. The Hellcats' dominance reflected American manufacturing capability and design philosophy. Grumman built 12,275 F6F Hellcats in just over 2 years, with production peaking at 600 aircraft monthly. Each aircraft required 20,000 man-hours to build. Yet assembly lines achieved remarkable speed through standardization and minimal design modifications. The basic F6F design stayed essentially unchanged from 1943 through 1945. Germany and Japan continuously modified their fighters, seeking marginal performance gains. America instead mass-produced a proven design at enormous scale. This strategy extended across all American aircraft production. Quantity with adequate quality defeated quality without quantity. Radar technology provided the deciding advantage in fighter direction. The SK Air Search radar detected aircraft at 100 miles, providing 40 minutes warning of incoming raids. The SM Fighter Direction Radar gave precise bearing and altitude information for vectoring interceptors to their targets. Combat information centers wove radar data with radio communications into a real-time battle management system, decades ahead of anything else. The proximity fuse, guarded as one of the war's most closely held secrets, revolutionized anti-aircraft defense. These shells detonated automatically when approaching aircraft, eliminating manual altitude calculations. The resulting blast forced Japanese planes to attack from greater altitudes where accuracy suffered. American logistics sustained operations at a pace nobody had attempted before. Task Force 58's Service Squadron delivered 270,000 gallons of aviation fuel, 7,000 gallons of lubricating oil, and 45 tons of ammunition daily during the battle. Replacement aircraft were catapulted from escort carriers directly to fleet carriers during operations. Maintenance crews worked through the night repairing damaged aircraft for immediate return to service. While technology and training created victory's conditions, individual pilots executed it. Their stories revealed the human side behind the numbers. Lieutenant Junior Grade Milton Carruthers from USS Bunker Hill achieved 5 kills despite having his hydraulic system destroyed by Japanese gunfire. Unable to lower his landing gear normally, he cranked it down by hand while flying with his knees, then set down successfully on the carrier deck. His plane captain counted 47 holes in the fuselage and wings. Ensign Robert Duncan from USS Princeton got separated from his division during the second wave intercept. Flying alone, he encountered 12 Japanese bombers without any fighter escort. During a 15-minute running battle, Duncan destroyed 4 bombers before exhausting his ammunition. He then used his aircraft to force another bomber into the ocean, achieving 5 kills while conserving his last rounds. Lieutenant Commander George Duncan, unrelated to Robert, from USS Monterey led a division that faced 40 Japanese aircraft. Outnumbered 10-1, Duncan's 4 Hellcats destroyed 19 enemy planes in 8 minutes. Duncan himself accounted for 6, managing his ammunition with disciplined precision. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade John Strange, destroyed 5 more. The coordination between these pilots demonstrated American tactical mastery. Divisions maintained mutual support while engaging multiple targets. Wingmen protected leaders during attacks. Damaged aircraft were escorted home by teammates. This disciplined teamwork stood in sharp contrast to the increasingly desperate individual efforts of Japanese pilots fighting for survival. For Japanese aviators, June 19th was apocalyptic. Pilot officer Yoshijiro Shirahama, one of 15 survivors from Zuikaku's air group, testified afterward. "We knew we were flying to our deaths when we saw the wall of Hellcats waiting for us. The sky filled with tracer fire, planes exploded everywhere. I watched at least 20 of our aircraft destroyed in less than a minute." Lieutenant Commander Akira Tarui led torpedo bombers from Chiyoda and watched his entire squadron annihilated. The Americans attacked from above, below, and both sides simultaneously. We couldn't maneuver or counterattack. My gunner died in the first pass. My controls were shot away in the second. I crashed into the sea and spent 6 hours in the water before a destroyer rescued me. The few experienced pilots understood their situation was hopeless. Lieutenant Sadamu Kamachi, an ace with 12 victories, survived by immediately dropping his bombs and fleeing at wave-top altitude. He later wrote, "The young pilots followed their training and held formation while being slaughtered. Those of us who survived did so by abandoning all tactical doctrine and running for our lives." The psychological impact was devastating. Ensign Takayo Miyazawa returned to Carrier Junyo with his aircraft shot full of holes. His report captured the horror of that day. The Americans were everywhere, he said. As soon as we engaged one group of Hellcats, another group attacked from a different angle. Our formations fell apart into chaos. Pilots screamed on the radio. I saw at least 30 of our planes burning and falling at the same moment. Admiral Mark Mitcher's leadership proved decisive throughout the entire battle. His willingness to launch all available aircraft against the incoming raids rather than holding reserves back maximized defensive firepower when it mattered most. His choice to light up the fleet for returning pilots showed genuine moral courage, accepting submarine risk to save his aircrews. Mitcher's fighter direction officers coordinated the most complex aerial defense ever attempted in naval warfare. Managing over 450 fighters simultaneously required flawless coordination between radar operators, fighter directors, and squadron commanders. The system functioned perfectly, vectoring fighters to optimal intercept positions while constantly monitoring fuel states and ammunition loads. That coordination, that human skill working alongside technology, had turned the tide of the entire Pacific War. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, faced considerable backlash for his decision not to chase Ozawa's fleet with greater intensity. Yet his fundamental responsibility remained clear: safeguarding the vulnerable invasion force at Saipan. That measured approach proved decisive. It eliminated any chance of Japanese warships launching a devastating strike against the undefended transports and supply vessels that formed the expedition's fragile lifeline. The 50,000 troops establishing their beachhead on Saipan depended entirely on steady flow of ammunition, food, fuel, and replacement equipment from the fleet offshore. Admiral Ozawa, despite absorbing horrendous casualties, orchestrated a disciplined retreat through nightmarish circumstances. His tactical shift, moving his flag from the mortally wounded Taiho to the cruiser Haguro, then forward to the carrier's Uyaku, preserved the command structure when it mattered most. His subsequent report demonstrated candor about the catastrophe. Enemy fighter control proved far superior to anything we anticipated. Their pilots possessed capabilities we had underestimated completely. Our aviation crews simply lacked the preparation necessary for combat at this intensity level. Yet behind those fighter formations stood thousands of support personnel whose contributions proved equally vital. Deck crews moved aircraft across confined flight decks with practiced efficiency, every movement choreographed to perfection. Ammunition specialists worked ceaselessly, feeding rounds into hungry weapons systems. Technicians labored between successive sorties, patching fuselage damage and replacing shattered components. Landing signal officers stood exposed on carrier decks, guiding damaged aircraft aboard, despite hydraulic failures, badly wounded pilots, and fuel running critically low. Aviation machinists mate First Class Roberto Martinez from USS Lexington remembered those exhausting hours vividly. His team accomplished the seemingly impossible repeatedly. They took damaged Hellcats, refueled their tanks, reloaded ammunition belts, inspected engines for damage, patched bullet holes using fabric and adhesive, and launched them back into combat. All within 12 minutes. They sustained this grueling pace for 20 straight hours during the engagement, with no thought of stopping. The work ethic never wavered. Nobody voiced complaints or doubts. Every crew member understood that pilots were counting on them, that hesitation or mistakes meant friendly pilots falling from the sky. The ammunition consumption reached staggering proportions. During a single day on June 19th, Task Force 58 expended over 2,400,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Ordnance teams worked at peak capacity, loading 15,000 rounds hourly. Belts of ammunition moving in continuous streams from ammunition magazines toward waiting aircraft, a relentless flow that persisted throughout daylight hours without interruption. Medical personnel saved countless lives through their intervention. Flight surgeons treated wounded aviators between sorties, allowing many to return and continue flying despite their injuries. Pharmacists mate Second Class James Thompson aboard USS Enterprise performed emergency surgical procedures on pilots suffering catastrophic wounds, including one aviator whose foot had been nearly severed by cannon fire. Remarkably, that same pilot returned to flying operations just 3 weeks later, equipped with a specially designed prosthetic fitted to his rudder pedal. Rescue operations achieved impressive results despite enormous challenges. Destroyers stationed as plane guards recovered downed pilots frequently within minutes of their ditching. Submarines positioned at lifeguard stations rescued aviators who had gone down far from the task force, some hundreds of miles away. Kingfisher float planes, launched from battleships and cruisers, ventured into waters controlled by Japanese forces to retrieve pilots. Intelligence gathering had provided warnings weeks beforehand. American codebreakers intercepted and decrypted Japanese naval communications, revealing Ozawa's fundamental strategy, his force composition, and expected timing. This advanced knowledge gave Spruance the ability to position his forces advantageously and prepare defensive responses for the anticipated assault patterns. The recovery of Z-Plan documents from Admiral Koga's aircraft in March 1944 had furnished American planners with comprehensive knowledge of Japanese strategic concepts. Every component of Operation Ago received anticipation and counters before the first aircraft launched. Radio intelligence specialists stationed throughout the carrier force intercepted Japanese tactical transmissions and translated them immediately. Lieutenant Charles Sims, fluent in Japanese, served aboard USS Lexington, monitoring enemy pilot communications throughout the engagement. His real-time translations revealed Japanese formation positions, their intended targets, and their casualty assessments. One intercepted message captured the depths of their desperation and confusion. A squadron leader's transmission came through clearly to those listening. Disbelief and horror colored every word. They understand our positions before we even identify them. This is not combat. This is slaughter. Sims provided the translation instantly to American personnel, raising their confidence while proving the effectiveness of their fighter control system. Technical intelligence added another dimension to American advantages. Captured Zero fighters underwent exhaustive examination, exposing every capability and vulnerability. American pilots received precise instruction on turning radius, climb rate, and critical weak points. Training curricula integrated this knowledge, teaching pilots exactly how to counter Japanese aircraft. The battle transformed the Pacific War's trajectory fundamentally. Japanese carriers would never again mount significant offensive operations. The Imperial Navy's laboriously rebuilt air groups, representing 2 years of intense training, experienced complete elimination during 8 hours of brutal engagement. Production numbers illustrated Japan's hopeless predicament. American manufacturing facilities produced 36,000 combat aircraft during 1944. Japanese factories manufactured 13,000, most of inferior construction, employing substitute materials due to material scarcity. American pilot training programs graduated 65,000 aviators that year. Japan trained fewer than 5,000, most with minimal flying time. That technological gap expanded relentlessly. America fielded advanced fighters including the F-4U Corsair and F-8F Bearcat. Radar capabilities improved monthly. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells transformed attacking American vessels into virtual suicide missions. Japan possessed no equivalent capability, resorting instead to desperate kamikaze tactics 3 months later at Leyte Gulf. Strategic bombing operations from captured Marianas bases commenced in November 1944. B-29 superfortresses flying from Saipan and Tinian systematically obliterated Japanese cities and manufacturing centers. Tokyo's firebombing in March 1945 killed greater numbers than either atomic bomb later dropped. Those atomic bombs departed from Tinian's airfield, constructed on territory conquered because Japanese naval aviation could not prevent American landings. The irreplaceable expertise vanished with Japan's experienced pilots. Flight instructors received orders transferring from training units into combat squadrons, accelerating training program degradation. By war's conclusion, Japanese pilots averaged barely 40 flight hours before entering combat. Numerous never successfully landed on carriers. The engagement validated American training methodology, emphasizing deflection shooting, energy management, and coordinated formations. The Thatch weave and comparable tactical concepts demonstrated clear superiority over Japanese reliance on individual performance and aerobatic maneuvering. Coordinated teamwork overcame individual skill consistently and decisively. American fighter design philosophy received complete vindication. The Hellcat prioritized pilot protection, weapon power, and structural integrity. That approach proved absolutely correct. The Zero sacrificed everything pursuing extreme agility, a philosophy that had become obsolete. Contemporary air combat rewarded survivability and destructive power above maneuverability. Fighter direction emerged as the decisive advantage. Centralized command maximized defensive effectiveness while reducing losses. Radar-guided vectoring allowed defending fighters to consistently achieve superior positioning. Japanese forces, lacking equivalent capabilities, flew without clear picture into prepared killing grounds. Logistics determined operational sustainability. American capacity to maintain relentless operations, rapidly repair damage, and replace losses created advantages that compounded. Japanese inability to replace losses meant each engagement further degraded their remaining capabilities. Attrition conflict favored nations possessing greater industrial output. Training quality ultimately mattered more than individual bravery. American aviators with 600 hours of preparation consistently defeated Japanese aviators with 200 hours, regardless of determination or warrior spirit. Methodical instruction in gunnery, tactics, and instrument flying created professional competence that enthusiasm simply could not achieve. Participants carried their experiences throughout remaining lifetimes. Alex Vraciu transitioned into test pilot work, evaluating advanced fighters representing naval aviation's future. He evaluated the F6F Bearcat, the Hellcat's successor, and subsequently tested emerging jet fighters. Vraciu concluded his naval career at commander rank in 1963 after surviving being shot down above Philippine territory and spending 6 weeks with Filipino guerrilla forces. David McCampbell pursued his career through subsequent ranks, eventually commanding carrier air groups and serving as commanding officer aboard multiple carriers, eventually reaching captain rank when he retired in 1964. He stood among naval aviation's greatest aces with 34 confirmed victories. McCampbell received the Medal of Honor for his courage on both June 19 and October 24, 1944. Numerous pilots transitioned into commercial aviation careers, captaining aircraft over those same Pacific passages they had fought to secure. The movement from military to civilian flying felt natural for men experienced in long-distance ocean navigation. Their wartime background rendered them exceptionally skilled pilots prepared for virtually any emergency. Japanese survivors encountered vastly different post-war paths. Certain men pursued Buddhist monastery lives, seeking spiritual peace regarding their wartime participation. Others contributed to Japan's post-war aviation sector, implementing hard-won knowledge into civilian aircraft development. Some composed written accounts documenting the defeated perspective. The psychological aftermath persisted for decades. American aviators endured recurring nightmares where Japanese aircraft kept coming in unending succession. Japanese survivors experienced similar dreams of Hellcats attacking from all directions simultaneously. Both populations carried invisible psychological wounds that years could never completely resolve. Decades afterward, reunion gatherings brought former antagonists together. At a 1984 meeting, Alex Vraciu encountered Sadamu Kumichi, among the handful of Japanese survivors from June 19. Kumichi told Vraciu simply, "You performed your duty precisely as I performed mine. I remain grateful that we both survived to become friends." They maintained correspondence until Kumichi's death in 2001. The engagement's legacy persists across multiple domains. Aviation museums preserve restored Hellcats and Zeros, enabling visitors to grasp the physical reality underlying the statistics. The National Museum of Naval Aviation displays an F6F3 bearing Alex Vraciu's aircraft markings, complete with 19 victory flags totaling his score. USS Yorktown, now permanently docked as a museum ship in Charleston, South Carolina, preserves turkey shoot exhibits. Visitors stand inside the Combat Information Center, where fighter directors guided Hellcats toward their interception points. The radar equipment, plotting displays, and communication apparatus remain in their 1944 configuration. Maritime archaeological teams have discovered numerous vessels lost during the battle resting on ocean floor. Shokaku settles at 12,000 feet, her flight deck still loaded with aircraft prepared for launch that would never come. Taiho lies deeper, her massive hull fractured by the explosion that sent her down. These underwater grave sites remain protected, memorializing thousands who perished in Philippine waters. Historical investigation continues advancing. Recently declassified Japanese records reveal previously unknown information regarding pilot preparation, production capabilities, and leadership decisions. American documentation, gradually becoming available through declassification processes, demonstrates the complete scope of intelligence benefits and technological advantages. Participant oral histories provide irreplaceable first-hand testimony. The Veterans History Project maintains hundreds of recorded interviews featuring Turkey Shoot participants. These direct personal accounts preserve details official documents overlook: the acrid taste of aviation fuel, the thunderous roar of Hellcat engines, burning aircraft plummeting earthward like falling stars. Educational initiatives ensure future generations appreciate the battle's significance. The Naval Aviation Museum's flight simulators permit visitors experiencing aerial combat from a Hellcat pilot's perspective. Documentary productions blend veteran recollections with computer-generated battle recreations, transforming statistics into human experiences. The Turkey Shoot accelerated military aviation evolution substantially. The battle demonstrated that radar-directed fighter defense could establish impenetrable protection against conventional assault. This realization influenced Cold War strategic planning, resulting in sophisticated layered air defense configurations. Proximity-fused ammunition technology from 1944 evolved into contemporary precision-guided weapons. The fundamental concept of detonating munitions proximate to targets without requiring direct contact underlies contemporary surface-to-air missiles and advanced air defense systems. Fighter direction methods developed for the Turkey Shoot provided the foundation for modern air traffic management. Those radar tracking, vectoring, and centralized control procedures that devastated Japanese air power now safely direct millions of civilian flights annually. American aircraft design throughout subsequent decades incorporated the survivability emphasis evident in the Hellcat. Contemporary American fighters maintain extensive protective plating, redundant systems, and ejection mechanisms tracing their origins to Pacific War lessons. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot transcended tactical significance. It established that contemporary warfare represented competition between systems rather than individual heroism. Superior technology, professional preparation, industrial capability, and information advantage created circumstances where courage alone could achieve nothing. Admiral Mitcher's official assessment stated simply, "The enemy's carrier aviation capacity has been eliminated." That obliteration resulted from convergence of American production capacity, engineering advancement, and human expertise. 8 hours of June 19, 1944 fighting destroyed Japanese naval aviation as an offensive capability. Across Philippine sea depths, 3 Japanese carriers occupy the ocean floor, aircraft still within hangars that would never again launch attacks. But actual destruction transpired in the sky, where over 400 Japanese aircraft and their irreplaceable crews perished before American Hellcats. The disparity proved final and irreversible. Japan commenced June 19, seeking a decisive victory that might arrest American momentum. They concluded it with naval air power effectively annihilated. Their strategic situation became hopeless, homeland vulnerable to strategic bombardment, culminating in atomic destruction. The Turkey Shoot represented something greater than military engagement. It marked the convergence point where technological superiority, training professionalism, and manufacturing capacity created permanent advantage. The era of individual samurai aviators had concluded, replaced by an epoch where systematic superiority determined results. Lieutenant Alexander Vraciu's extended fingers, displaying his score to Admiral Mitcher, became the engagement's most enduring photograph. That young pilot's moment of triumph captured forever. Yet that image concealed deeper truths. American pilots flying American fighters equipped with American technology and logistics systems had accomplished what no quantity of Japanese warrior spirit could overcome. The Hellcat lived up to its ferocious name, unleashing devastation upon those challenging American naval supremacy. During 8 devastating hours, Grumman's rugged fighter transformed the Pacific War's direction. The aircraft, some labeled the Iron Tank, demonstrated conclusively that durability and firepower exceeded agility and elegance. June 19, 1944, established Japan's conclusion as a carrier power and commenced American naval aviation's unquestioned Pacific dominance. That superiority persisted through conflict's conclusion and established the carrier aviation model persisting into the present era. Those desperate hours above Philippine waters imparted lessons regarding training quality, technological capability, and systematic advantage that remain applicable in today's stealth fighter and precision munitions age. The Turkey Shoot stands as history's most unbalanced aerial engagement, an occasion when American naval aviation achieved its apex while Japanese carrier aviation experienced destruction. Within a single tropical day, the Pacific War's culmination became inevitable. The empire of the rising sun had been eclipsed by the wings extending from American carriers, and the passage to Tokyo Bay stretched openly across the vast and endless Pacific.